Is it really Europe's refugee crisis?
Well, no, it's not just Europe's crisis, and arguably I think the word crisis for what's happening in Europe, it may be something we ought to question too. What we're seeing at the moment is a situation of record forced displacement globally. There's about 60 million people forcibly displaced around the world. Most of those are displaced inside their own country. About 20 million of those are refugees. In other words, they've crossed an international border fleeing persecution or conflict. So this is a very much wider problem than just Europe's alone. However, the past year has seen the problem of the world's refugees, the world's displaced, becoming much more apparent in Europe, in the countries of the global north. So we are in the midst today of an immense reaction to this in Europe, some positive developments, many positive developments over recent months, but also a worrying situation too. As countries react to this, some look to border protection rather than refugee protection as their priorities. This is a global crisis, of which Europe is seeing one element.
And let me just, if I may add to that, I don't agree with this being called a European refugee crisis. I think it's a political crisis. Just going back to a few numbers, I mean, there are some 500 million people living in Europe. And yes, last year, a fairly high number, 1 million arrived. But 1 million out of 500 million ought to be very, very manageable. We recognize the difficulties. Of course, there are pressures, there are challenges, but it is very difficult to understand how one of the most developed regions of the world cannot find the capacity, the means to manage this crisis. So I see it much more as a political crisis, but to call it Europe's refugee crisis, I don't think is accurate.
Let's look at the European situation. In 2015, about 1 million people arrived by boat, mainly in Greece, mainly in Italy. We've all seen the pictures. It's all been over the news in recent months. Against Europe's population of about 500, 550 million, it's a very small number indeed. About, if my maths is right, that's about 0.2% of the population of Europe. If you equate this to other forms of movement to Europe, tourism, for example, Europe had almost 600 million international tourists last year. It managed that pretty well. We aren't seeing a problem at the moment of Europe being overwhelmed by numbers. We're seeing a problem, as Søren said earlier, a political problem of Europe coming to terms with managing.
Too many politicians today make statements where one has the impression that they haven't really taken the time or had the time to sort of understand the subjects.